Good evening, good morning, or good afternoon from wherever you are. Welcome to the Tower at UNN. And it's been a while that I've been able to bring this show to you. So, firstly and foremost, want to give thanks to the Most High that we're still here, we're still alive, we're still breathing, and we're still interacting with life as be it on this realm we call Earth. And I would like to extend apologies as our regular host. Dr. Juko will not be able to take on this show today, and I'm going to be here to take on the show. And we're going to delve into some topics that are of interest to us, not only as Ugandan people, but also as Africans. And then I want to also apologize for my co-host today, as he couldn't be here with us today, even though he was advertised to come. And I want to send greetings to everyone from where you are or where this program might find you. I hope that you're doing well. And in the case that you are not, I hope that life turns to be more tender to you. And yeah, so today we're going to be talking about the elephant in the room that lies in the Great Lakes region, and that is the region and territory that we have grown to know as the Congo, known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. So why is the Democratic Republic of Congo important for not only us as Ugandans, but also as Africans? We must understand that, number one and foremost, how did even the Congo come into creation? How did the borderlines that create the Congo, or be it Uganda, or be it South Sudan, or be it Sudan, or Kenya, or Tanzania, how did all these countries materialize into the borders that we know of them as today? Because this happened all over Africa. But in the background of that is, why is there war on the Congo if given so this as a country and territory of itself? In the backdrop of that, we have the question of colonization. Of course, the same thing we see in Uganda. Buganda, I'll use the example, Buganda in and of itself was a nation. It was a country. It was not a collection of tribes. It was a country, a nation of itself, and remains a suppressed nationality in the umbrella of what we know as Uganda, which is the colonial borders that were drawn as territory for the British to protect. Same thing happened with the Congo, and it was territory that was drawn for the Belgians to exploit. Congo is rich in all resources known to man, land resources, water resources, anything that can materialize into wealth can be found in the Congo. And for that reason, no peace has been availed to the people of the Congo. Instead of these riches being of the use to the population of the Congo, they have been used as a weapon to wage war on the people of the Congo. So firstly, as we open up this show, what we talk about, it is always important to talk about the post-independence movement, the independence movement, and of course the first prime minister of independent Congo, who is Patrice Lumumba. So in 1960, after organizing the masses and after fighting for independence from the brutal regime or the brutal colonization of the Belgian people, which is a country in Europe, the Congo managed to attain independence, and Patrice Lumumba became the first prime minister of the Congo. However, in 1961, he was assassinated, and his assassination went a little bit like this. It was a morbid event whereby he was abducted. After he was abducted, he managed to escape. He was abducted again, and then after being abducted, he was flown, and on that flight, he was beaten with his companions, and then they were flown. And then when they arrived at the private villa, they were beaten, dismembered, and a shooting squad. They were shot to death, and he was in the company of Joseph Okito and Maurice, two of his companions. They were shot to death by a Congolese fire squad, but under the supervision of the Belgians officers, and then they dismembered their bodies and dropped them in shallow graves, where a Belgian police officer retrieved a tooth off of Patrice Lumumba as a, let's say, souvenir. And then they were afraid that because they had buried them in shallow graves, this will become a pilgrimage site where Congolese people would later come to pay respect and tribute to their hero. So they decided to pour sulfuric acid on the bodies so that no parts of the bodies would be left behind. But the police officer managed to take a tooth. And this later, after lobbying by Patrice Lumumba's family, they managed in 2020, it was September of 2020, to reclaim the tooth of Patrice Lumumba to be returned home to Congo to be laid to rest with his ancestors. And then it wasn't only Belgium that participated in this. In 1995, it was revealed that the CIA of the US had a failed plan to assassinate Patrice Lumumba. So why was it that Patrice Lumumba had to die? The one thing that Patrice Lumumba said after independence was he was going to look out in terms of minerals, he was going to look out for the interests of his people. And he was seeking for help to fight the resistance that was happening internally, because the Congo is so mineral rich. And he turned to the Soviet Union for assistance, and that was what led to the Western powers to support and even participate, because the Belgians did participate in his assassination, not morally but actively participated with their supervision and the retrieving of a tooth that was found in Belgium, that had been in Belgium for 50 years, which is half a century. So we find ourselves whereby the questions now that remain: why is there still war on the Congo? And who is actively participating in this war on the Congo? And in the midst of this war, have international organizations such as the United Nations that still remain there. And a lot of reporting has to do with, they all point to one aspect, that is the looting of minerals in the Congo. That is why there is a war in the Congo. So then brings on the question of Kagame and Museveni. When the genocide happened in Rwanda, a lot of information that has later come out unveils and does point fingers to the active participation of the United States in the Rwandese genocide, which actually separates itself from the rhetoric that we have always been told, that the United States did not play a role and did not play an active role and just helped with the retrieving of fleeing refugees from Rwanda. So we know for a fact, and this has been documented, that President Kagame, the president of Rwanda, has been trained, has been equipped, and has been supported by not only the United States of America, but the Western world. And throughout Museveni's regime, it is not a secret either that the Western world, especially the United States, which of course is the leading band in the collective colonialism that is happening, supports and nourishes and has gained a lot from their relationship with Museveni. So how do these play a role in the strategic placements of these countries in relationship to the Congo? We know that both Uganda and Rwanda are active neighbors of the Congo and are actively in the Congo. In 2012, a lot of funding was stopped from going to Rwanda because of the reports that were coming out of active participation of Rwandese militants, and also Rwanda funding weapons to militants in the Congo. Recently, in Uganda's sake, we which Rwanda denied, by the way. But recently, just this year, the Ugandan the Ugandan illegitimate government has claimed that the Islamist group that they're fighting in Uganda has found its way to push its way into the Congo. But as we have Uganda and Rwanda's troops in the Congo, the biggest question is, why is the UN in the Congo? Of course, they claim for peacekeeping and rescuing. But while this all happens, war and violence happens, is in the backdrop of minerals being looted out of the Congo, being redirected out of the Congo, that doesn't even benefit the people of Congo. And we will go on to see this further. If the producer can go on to the next topic as we go through the topics today. So we want to look through the different opinions and the different circumstances that surround this. So this was from an article. This article was in 2012. I think we all know the journalist Andrew Mwenda, and this was on the topic of troops participating in the Congo. And it says, a prominent Ugandan journalist has recently argued the senior members of the Kagame regime have been willing to turn a blind eye to those within Rwanda who wish to provide support to the Tutsi descendant groups in the DRC. Mwenda makes it clear that the threat to Rwanda's borders and Congolese Tutsis in the form of the FDLR is still very real. In the absence of an effective Congolese state capable of policing its easternmost extremists, the Rwandese government needs these groups to work as buffers to protect its border. So the main question that came from this opinion on what Rwanda should do in relationship to they're now referred to as the Congolese Tutsis, and these are all refugees that went into the Congo. And not to forget that Kagame's military went into the eastern Congo and killed a lot of Hutu refugees after the genocide that has not been shed enough light on, and is a war against humanity and is also genocide in it of itself. The main question that we should ask ourselves to all this information: why is it that leveraging of people in the Congo, why is it that Congo is always put in the light that it poses a threat to other countries' security? This is not so different from Uganda right now, after this year, the illegitimate government saying that, oh, now the extremist groups are in the Congo and Congo is a threat to Uganda. It's the same trickery that has been used by Rwanda, whereby Rwanda says we need to protect our borders from the Congo, but it's because of the refugees that left our country and are in the Congo. I don't know if that is starting to make sense, but I think that as we go on further, we're going to see this pattern. It's a pattern that has been done by the Congo's neighbors, who have leaders who are puppets for the Western world. They leverage their peace. It's the same thing that happened with Sudan. What happened with Sudan was Museveni claimed that Kony had the Sudan. Therefore, to protect ourselves from Kony, we had to go into the Sudan to fight off Kony. This led to, of course, having a ruler who doesn't have his people's interests at heart in the Sudan, and having a regime that will bend backwards for Museveni. And bending backwards for Museveni only means bending backwards for, of course, the Western powers that rule Museveni, because he is now a president without the support of the US or the Western world. Same for is now a president without the support of the Western world. And this is recorded information, and is not just information that I'm getting out of thin air. So again, here we have right here a Ugandan journalist supporting Rwanda intensifying its attitude towards the Congo to protect Rwanda's borders, and juxtaposition that which happened in 2012 to what happened just last year in 2021 with Uganda, where Ugandan troops, if we could go to the next slide, producer, where Ugandan troops are then allowed to march into the Congo to fight Islamic extremist groups. But this is also, Ugandans, let us not forget, this is after so many leaders, so many religious leaders have been killed at their homes, so many different suspects without a lot of investigation or a lot of reports to mark as to why they were killed within the country, were killed, and no report comes from that. But all we get is that they have now moved into the Congo, and Uganda needs to intensify its security and move into the Congo to fight this group that has moved into the Congo. If the producer can please play the video that we meant to play for this show, and you will be the judge on whether this is a war that is fighting extremist groups, or this is a war that has been placed on the Congolese people by the illegitimate Ugandan government and all its neighbors that they work in collaboration with. And that's keeping in mind with president's the illegitimate president's son going to Rwanda recently to meet President Kagame to you know to help smoothen the relationship between Uganda and Rwanda, and the collaboration and participation of the two nations in the Congo. And we will be the judges of whether this is a war that is meant to protect borders, of which these are all borders that have been created, let's not forget, by the Western world, and whether this is a war for that or it's a war against the people and towards the looting of the nation. If the producer could please play that video next. Sorry, I did not actually say trigger warning before the video was played, but I think that a trigger warning ought to be given before the video was played. But we can see the extreme use of not only, this is warfare that has been put on the Congolese people, and we're not talking about, just in recent times. This has happened over the past, from 1960, the Congo has known no peace. The Congo has only known brute violence, brute force. And the Congolese people have been pushed off of their land. They have been pushed away further from their resources. And of course, the two people, not only two, but everyone who calls themselves a leader in the East African region, everyone that surrounds the Congo and calls themselves a leader, has only actively turned a blind eye or actively participated in this war. And this war continues to displace Congolese people, place them to further draw them apart from the resources that belong to the Congolese people, only to benefit the ones who want to make profit, only to benefit the ones who have only cared about enriching themselves and carrying on these long regimes, such as we've seen Museveni's long regime that only profits him and his family. So, as I asked before, you ought to be the judge whether this is a war to protect Rwandese borders, whether this is a war to protect Ugandan borders, or is this a war to further push people off of their land? Is this a war to further steal resources from people? Is this a war to further disorient people from their belonging? This is like people are leaving their lands, people are leaving their homes, people are leaving their places of origins. They're being displaced by force, by the help of fellow African leaders who are supposed to lead people to self-governance, self-realization. We live in a we live at a time where we are being led totally by people who are not. We always say that these people are power hungry, but it's not only power that they seek. They can only sustain themselves with the little handouts that they get from the Western world when they do things like this, when they march into countries like this and are used to do dirty jobs like this. This is the only way they can enrich themselves, and they will use any opportunity to do so. It doesn't matter whether a place is bombed in Uganda. It doesn't matter to them whether a place is bombed in Uganda to create a rhetoric where they will march into the Congo for things like this. It doesn't matter whether they march into the Congo and kill a lot of Hutu refugees only to match the rhetoric of protecting its borders. This is a cycle that has been repeated, and it is our responsibility. We cannot fight for our freedom to free ourselves of Museveni, thinking that it has nothing to do with the Congo. It has everything to do not only with Uganda, but the whole Great Lakes region. And Museveni does not work alone, has never worked alone. And it is no surprise now that the illegitimate president's son now finds it politically to Rwanda and re-establish Ugandan-Rwandese relationship. And to establish himself, give himself some political background. So I think we all recognize what is happening now. I think we all recognize how we've been led. I think we're starting to see the elephant in the room. If you enter politics for only the gain of profit, you will not be fighting for us, but only for your monetary gain. And the only way you can make profit if you're an African leader, that is if you're willing to align yourself with the Western world, because they will pay you. They will pay you to do this because they make more profit from looting the Congo. They will pay you to be a puppet. That is why people like Patrice Lumumba get killed, because they're not willing to hand out the lives of their people to the same people that colonized them. And colonization was nothing like, oh, we were just ruled by these Western countries. It included the same violence that we're seeing right now. Psychologically, physically, it was violence. And when people fought to free themselves, it wasn't for the puppets that we have today in this era, such as, of course, the likes that have been mentioned throughout this. And producer, can we please go to then the next slide? This one, please. So why do we bring up all this right now at this point in time and today? And why is this important to us as Ugandan people? Right now, we're at a political stage whereby we've been lied to, we've been bamboozled, we've been used. The big question right now is, who is the suitable candidate to actually take over leadership in Uganda that will keep the cycle going? And this doesn't mean only that we need to put a leader who will stop Uganda's involvement in the Congo. Because it's not only about stopping Uganda's involvement in the Congo, it is about making sure that first and foremost, we as neighbors, because growing up, some of the values were, uh, even though I was my mom's child, or I belonged to my family, but the neighbors always looked out. So it's the idea of you have to look out for your neighbor. No man's an island. Everyone must look out for themselves. So it's not about us actively participating in the military, but it's also looking out and making sure that neighboring countries participate in the draining of the Congo for the benefit of the Western world. And this is the elephant in the room of who is the best candidate that most lobbyists and politicians and all enactors are scratching their head with, is who will replace Museveni, who is more suitable to replace Museveni to keep the cycle going. That's the only reason, because he's not everlasting. And for us as Ugandan people, our question is, because our interests are aligned with the interest of the Congolese people, and that is to free ourselves, to get one thing, to get self-determination. First of all, we need nationalism. We need to be able to govern and rule our country the way we deem it so. And some of the things that we have come on to talk about has been, of course, a federal government, and why that is important and displaces the neocolonial agenda. We will talk further into that, because it's the idea of reclaiming the power, and the power being centered not outside of our region, which is the African region, but not outside of our country as well, which is the Ugandan country. And also we do come from I'll talk from the Buganda side, and also it is important to me for it not to be outside of Buganda nation. So all of this is layered, where the reclamation of power as a member of the masses, not only is not that power should be reclaimed for me as an African person, as a Ugandan person, and also as a Muganda as well. There is levels and it's layered. And the one way that we can fight for that is by fighting for systemic change. Because in Uganda, the changing and swapping out of a ruler is not going to change the situation in Uganda. Because the swapping out of a ruler, depending on who is going to be supporting this ruler, does not change the situation not only in Uganda, but in the Congo. And Ugandans wish and actually be cognizant of the fact that whenever there is still violence in the Congo, violence in Uganda will continue. Whenever there is still violence that surrounds us, this violence will continue. Our interests have always been aligned, and the events that follow to African peoples are the same. So again, to repeat myself, the Congo lies in the heart of Africa. It is a problem of every African person, not only the ones who continentally are on the African continent, but the ones in the diaspora as well. And it is a pattern that has not only been repeated, it is a pattern that is not only done in the Congo, but it is a repeated pattern all over the different African states. As we can see, Museveni uses the same military tactics that he uses in the Congo to use them against Ugandan people. So fighting this evil means that fighting it for the region as well. And there's steps, there's strategies that we can use as Ugandan people to be, first of all, in collaboration with ourselves, and also in collaboration with our fellow African people, which is next borders in the Congo. And the bigger head of it all is this idea of neocolonialism. So far, when we look at all the leaders that we have to swap out, of course, we've been given the president's son, which is very ironic. That now is a time that I even called him president, the illegitimate president's son, because he's only a tyrant, and you cannot be the son of a tyrant, grew up in a system of a tyrant, enjoyed all the benefits of a tyrant's rule, to try and govern the same people with, and say you're bringing, you're bringing collaboration with other countries and unity and peace. It's a fallacy that we are too cognitive to fall for. So in regards as it goes for General Muhoozi, it is not as a surprise, but it's not something we should take lightly as Ugandan people. And then moving on to opposition politics, we have seen so many buildings and mansions being built. We have seen cars being driven. The monetaries have been talked about. A lot of weddings have been held. And it is clear that politics is a business, as for Museveni it has always been. Many have, but it's not only for Museveni that politics is a business. We have to understand that even Museveni to be in power is business with the Western world. Museveni is paid to be in power. Museveni does not have all those riches because he did nothing. He has all those riches because he has business deals with the Western power. And the only way to cut a puppet off from the puppeteer is to cut the lanes that join the puppet to the puppeteer. And that can only be done by the masses, be done by the Ugandan people, by African people, by organizing themselves and demanding for systematic rule that they want to be governed in. And that can be asked for through pushing and pressing for federal government, because we have very many things that support our request for federacy. First and foremost, Buganda is a suppressed nation. Buganda was a nation before the British came to Uganda. They owe us so much, and they ought to rectify the error that they did. In terms of, first of all, was the Milo land, was the first error of the British, creating that. Number two is treating Buganda like a tribe, because it wasn't. It was a nation, and that distinction ought to be made. And Buganda is not the only suppressed nation in Uganda. Other nations existed in Uganda as well and ended up being put together as a bunch. And we should remember that whenever the colonizer used the word tribe, it wasn't within the light of positivity. It was to create the barbaric African that ought to be governed by the Western world. So why is it that we're in a new century and these problems are realigning themselves and presenting themselves to us? What is the one common factor that follows is violence. They need tyrants. They need tyrants like Kagame. They need tyrants like Museveni. They are not fooling anyone that these leaders brought peace to their countries. And it is a veil that we have chosen to take off. There will never be peace if violence like this continues, if we're displaced from our lands, if we're disposed of in different diasporas from the Middle East to Europe, to North and South America, there will be no peace. So again, as we go towards the end of today's show, is to talk about, then if the producer could please go to the next slide, is to talk about three different themes that still hold very true to all of us now. The first theme is nationalism. And I want us as Ugandan people to think about, what does nationalism mean for Ugandans? But not only what does nationalism mean for Ugandans, what does nationalism mean in a federal governed Uganda, but not a federal governance whereby all the power is left to the central government, but where power is fully distributed in all the different federal states of Uganda. What does that kind of nationalism mean for Ugandan people? But also to keep in mind that nationalism for an African state is not enough. We must transcend nationalism. We must transcend petty nationalism and indifference towards our neighbors, because what happens in the next in the next African state around us affects us. Because see what has been happening in the Congo for all these years, and where that has left the violence in not only Uganda, but in South Sudan, in the Sudan when it was still a Sudan. These are all wars that we can point that Museveni actively participated in. Somalia. So it is no surprise that a lot of violence happens within Uganda, because the glue or the magnetic energy to the pattern of the violence happening around us is homegrown. It's in Uganda. Actively participated in wars everywhere, all the way to, where is it? There's this country where Uganda sends its troops. Sorry, it skipped my mind. It's in West Africa. But actively participated in every war, not only in Somalia, everywhere. And the only one thing this regime wants to be remembered for was the fact that it let South African troops who were fighting against up to train in Uganda. That's the one thing this regime forever will refer itself to when we talk about its militancy. But they don't want to talk about the war the war they placed on the northern Ugandans. That was a genocide. They killed Ugandans and northern Ugandans to chase them off land that they now use for their benefit. The war that's been put on the people of Karamojong, of Karamoja, sorry, on the Karamojong people. That is a war as well on Ugandan people. The war on Buganda nation, that is a war again by this regime. The war that happens on the Congolese people, that is a war manifest this regime. The South Sudan, this regime was actively participating. The death of Garang, Museveni is there. His picture is there. We talk about Libya. Museveni currently appears, and his involvement with it as well. We talk about because Museveni did have, we all know that the mosque that was built in Old Kampala, like that was built by the late President Gaddafi, and apparently they had good relations. But what is the involvement of Museveni in all of that? We talk about Somalia and the active participation of Ugandan troops in Somalia. That is not a hidden secret. So how do we expect our troops to be warmongers and not expect war and violence in our own country? So we must always go beyond nationalism and think about Pan-Africanism. Always go beyond that point, because to achieve toleration and freedom, not only for African peoples who are on the African continent, but the diaspora as well, we must be united as one to benefit ourselves as African peoples and govern ourselves the way how we choose to govern ourselves. And that's when we refer back to our nationalism. They all go hand in hand. So as we conclude today's show, just going to go over just a little bit of what Pan-Africanism is, the ideology, and in future shows we'll just dive deeper into it. But this is an ideology that has been held over time, for a long period of time, by so many revolutionaries. We could go from Steve Biko to Kwame Nkrumah, and in Uganda there was a proclaimed Professor Dani Ndebere. We can talk about Marcus Garvey. We can talk about Julius Nyerere. And Pan-Africanism shared that a united African people and her diaspora, the belief that African peoples both on the continent and in the diaspora share not merely a common history, but a common destiny. And when we talk about common destiny, that's the question that we were talking about. How do we expect Ugandan troops to be in the Congo spreading violence, to be in Somalia spreading violence, and not to be in Uganda doing the same violence or the same war on Ugandan people? It's the question of a common destiny. Until we recognize that we have a common history that comes not only from a history of colonization, but a history of Western imperialism, all the way even before the African people and the introduction of the capitalist system. But that because of that common history, our destiny destiny is also we have a common destiny. We must recognize that, and we must fight from from where we stand, and then fight for all. And by from where we stand, I mean Ugandans, we have to organize ourselves politically to be a real political threat to this regime, because the political organization we have right now is just playing to the tune of Museveni's drum. We cannot sit here and pretend that the elections that happened in 2021 did not fully avail themselves to what we can call Museveni Congo, whereby he will own the electoral commission, the internet will be shut off. So many have forgotten that internet was shut off and no communication was allowed to be coming from the inside, that military will be disposed on the streets, on election polls, that a computer in a country where internet has been shut off and not connected to anything will receive, will be the one to receive votes from the whole nation, where people were listening on radios and TVs and going to polling stations and saying these are not the same results. An election where we saw so many foot soldiers who received DRC forms that confirm that it was a rigged election have been killed, if not killed, have been tortured in jails, if not tortured, have been dismembered. And we're not going to forget that so many also are in exile and running. We have seen all this happen, and we are really going to convince ourselves that we have to wait for another election in 2026 to participate in the same program when the next president comes and does the same cycle? Then the question is, what do we really want? Do we want to be ruled just by anyone that is not Museveni, or do we actually want to reclaim power and have freedom? Those are questions that we should be asking ourselves. Without interrogating within yourself and asking yourself these questions, you're not going to arrive to the point whereby liberty is not just liberty, freedom is important to you. Self-determination is important to you. But ultimately, we do this so that we can have some joy in our countries, in our nations. We can have some dignity to ourselves, to our personhoods. We don't do it for anything beyond that and the future generations. Because this doesn't stop with us. Just like our ancestors fought, it never stopped with them. So, what do we really want? That should be a question. Is it power that you want, or do we just want the next president and get it over with? Because if it is power that you really want, we're going to think about politically reorganizing ourselves. We're going to think about being intentional with the efforts that we put into, and we're going to think about how this could really be different. And that can only come with the total dismantling of the political situation as it exists in Uganda, the governance that exists in Uganda, the force, the brute violence that exists. And we have to be willing to listen, first of all, to mend relationships with neighboring countries that have been harmed by the government. We need to be accountable to that. And by being accountable to that, it starts with our actions, whereby when we fight for our freedom, we don't only fight for Museveni and his governance and rule to leave Uganda, but we fight for his governance and rule to leave the Congo. We fight against his governance and rule to demand for the reparations, or to shed light onto the war against the Hutu people in the Congo that happened, that was masqueraded by, of course, Kagame and Museveni. So hopefully this show has unveiled something to you today. I'm sorry I cannot take calls today, but we're doing some operations as this show goes forward. I'm going to be hosting this show for a while. So, and we will have guests. Sorry, today day was kind of I kind of just had to come out and do the show today, but we're going to look into proper preparation for the next shows, and the next shows will be advertised, but we're going to go on and be talking about these ideas of what does nationalism look like, what does Pan-Africanism look like. But as we think of nationalism and totally organizing ourselves as a political, not only, remember, when we organize ourselves politically, it's not only for the politics, but it's for the social and the economic bits. So we're going to be thinking about all those avenues, talking about the guests come on the show and talk about them over time. I hope that show something was learned or something was taught. I'm sorry I can't take I can't take calls and interact with the audience today, but in the future we will be taking calls as per the show. And I just want to thank everyone on today, and hopefully we can keep this conversation going, because the theory is, one thing I believe in is, teach one to teach 10. Every time I learn something new from one person, I have to endeavor to teach it to at least 10 people. So don't be stingy with the information. Spread the information, talk to people, have conversations. Let us keep interacting, because the cradle of Museveni's rule, or the cradle of neocolonialism, because it's not Museveni's rule, it's the Western world being able to exploit resources not only in the Congo but also in Uganda. It's cracking, but it has always been a crack, because the system has always been cracked. So let's keep having this conversation. Let's keep thinking about how we want to reclaim power, not only for ourselves, for our beings, but also for our future generations. And yeah, thank you everyone who's been listening into today. And don't forget to ask yourself the question of, what do you really want as a Ugandan? Because once you ask yourself that question, you're going to look at the political field differently and stop being fooled into opposition politics when we know for sure where that has led us. It has done what it has done, and now it is time that we rebuild. And in the rebuilding, for those willing to participate, you ought to really look to engage in the consultative council. You ought to engage in educating yourself about federalism. You ought to engage in really revising. This has all been offered on this channel, whereby we talk about, Buganda as a nation and revising what that is. You ought to engage in revising what other nations, actually separate nations and nationalities that exist in Uganda and were put together by the British so that they could rule this country, and called it a protectorate. We need to engage with where else has this happened, because it happens all over. It happened all over with colonization. But we also need to remember the main principle. All this is done for profit. All this is done for economic gain. And isn't the opposition so paid that they have built houses, they drive cars, they've had big weddings, and who has it costed? It's costed you. It's costed the next generation. It's costing my generation for failing to realize this is happening. And it's funny that I was thinking about it. I think there is something we say chigulaluji. I think this is chigalaluji, as we close up the show. If you want to see how much money rules things in Uganda, just go listen to Ugandan music. I was thinking about a comparison. And most Ugandan music, they say in Uganda, love is a business. Even to the basic thing of just expressing love or showing love amongst other, it is looked at as a business. It's looked at as a source of income. That's how much money governs the decisions that people make. So if you ever thought it was done out of love, just know love signifies a monetary exchange. is the culture that the Museveni regime has brought to the Ugandan people. So thank you very much. A good evening to y'all, everyone who is evening time. Good morning if we came to you during the morning time, and good night to viewers who got to see this in the night time. May the Most High guide and protect, and till next Sunday.